when you're going to come under that machine. So do not procrastinate in this thing. You can procrastinate in other things, you'll survive. But the general principle of the deen is that in acts of worship, you don't procrastinate. The Prophet ﷺ in hadith mentions that one of the best deeds is to pray salah at its time, in the beginning of its time, for example. And that's because when you pray it in the beginning of its time, you're going to get it. If you procrastinate and push it off to the end of its time, you may get it, but eventually you're going to miss it. One day, you're going to say, let's say Dhuhr ends at 4 o'clock, you're going to pray at 3:50, you're going to pray at 3:50, you're going to pray at 3:55, and then those days are going to come when you pray at 4:10 because you were so used to delaying it to 3:55 and something else came up. So be careful with the Hajj. Now again, the extremity of each of these circumstances, whether they be internal or external reasons for delay, is that the Hajj doesn't get performed when it could have been done. Meaning the situation that an individual has the ability to go for Hajj existed, but then they end up not doing it and they pass away. And it happens. And again, the results of this are drastic. Why? Because immediately after this ayah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly follows up that portion of the ayah with this statement, وَمَنْ كَفَرَ, and as for he who denies this or turns away from this, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ, then recognize that verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from want from the world. Allah's greatness is not dependent on our going for Hajj. Allah's greatness is not dependent on even the Hajj occurring. The whole world can decide that they're going to boycott the Hajj, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remains supreme. And the whole world can decide that they're all going to go for the Hajj this year, and it's not going to change Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's greatness in even the slightest degree. He's wara, thumma al-wara, thumma al-wara. There is nothing that alters Allah's greatness based on what we perform. Alright? So, recognize though that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a very stern statement here. Uses the word kufr. فَمَنْ كَفَرَ. Alright? Very firm. In fact, Hazrat Umar radiallahu an, based on this ayah, used to say that it's my opinion that whoever has health and wealth to get to Hajj and then still does not go and then dies without performing it, he will have the word kafir written on his forehead on the Day of Judgment. Based on this ayah, he used to make this statement. Furthermore, amongst our scholars, it's stated that many of the tabi'een who were scholars, they would not pray the janazah, or they would not join the janazah of the person who was rich and able, but did not go for the Hajj. So among the scholars of the tabi'een, they were so strict about this. And based on this ayah and their understanding of this ayah, that if an individual died who was wealthy and healthy and had the ability to go for Hajj but had not gone, they would not even join the janazah, some of them. And this is further supported by a hadith from Ali radiallahu an. Hazrat Ali radiallahu an states that the Prophet ﷺ said concerning the person who is able to go for Hajj and then died without going, and then the hadith states all these conditions, فَلْيَمُتْ إِنْ شَاءَ يَهُودِيًّا. It doesn't matter whether he dies in the state of Judaism, وَإِنْ شَاءَ نَصْرَانِيًّا, or if he dies as a Christian, for him it's equivalent. So the Prophet ﷺ basically stated in this hadith, which is from the book of Imam Tirmidhi, that if an individual has the ability to go for Hajj and does not lack anything that prohibits them from going for Hajj, and then they die, let them die as a Jew or as a Christian. It's up to them. So you can see again the same concept, right? وَمَنْ كَفَرَ. So it's all these things put together are highlighting this central point that denying the Hajj, that turning away from the Hajj, that putting importance on something other than the Hajj is very much frowned upon within the Sharia. Now this last hadith that I mentioned is actually a weak hadith. So recognize a couple of things. Number one, we're not going to establish a mandate from this hadith. We'll only take benefit from this hadith. Right? So there's a fadilah listed here. And also, it's in the context of this ayah that the whole picture comes together. And you have to then interpret everything, putting all the resources together. So putting all of this together, then our scholars basically come up with the following ruling. Number one, if an individual denies Hajj, they say, what is this Hajj thing? Hajj was just for 1400 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore. Those people didn't have anything better to do, na'udhu billah. Now we have other things that we do in life. The person speaks like that, na'udhu billah, they deny the Hajj. they enter into a state of kufr. Alright? And basically, they leave the fold of the deen. Why? Because they're denying an ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And an individual who denies an ayah has denied the revelation of Allah. And if they deny the revelation of Allah, then they've actually left the fold of the deen. If an individual does not perform the Hajj, that's considered a major sin. They remain within the fold of the deen, but they will have died committing a major, major sin. So this is something to reflect on, considering our state, whether we have the ability or not, and considering the choices we make. Often we choose to not do the Hajj. Now you think about it, what do you mean I choose to not do the Hajj? Well, we decide, I want to go to school. So then we end up amassing $20, $40, $50, $80,000 worth of debt. Then you come to the scholar and you say, well, now I can't go for Hajj. Well, of course, the ruling actually then becomes that since you're in debt, you need to pay off your debt before you can go for Hajj. But the question is, why didn't you just wait 1 year, before you got yourself into all this debt, go for Hajj, and then get yourself into this debt? Now you got yourself into a bind where you want to go for Hajj, and now the circumstances don't allow. So often we place our own desires, our own aspirations, our own goals before the Hajj. And so it really behooves each individual, right, that when they're thinking about what to do, that they make a proper plan. We make so many plans. We make plans for 50 years down the line. Right now I'm going to high school, then inshallah soon I'm going to go to college. After college, I've already planned that I want to go to this school for graduate school, and then I want to get a job, and I'm going to try to live in this area, and I'm going to try to buy this kind of car. In our minds, we map out 50, 60 years worth of dunya, right? But what about for the deen? It's the same thing. You have to map these things out. Rather than just ending up in a circumstance and saying, now what do I do, right? You have to map these things out. For example, if you want to buy a house, and you know the house is going to be a big expenditure, and you're going to put yourself into a circumstance where it's going to become a long-term investment, then why don't you delay for a year, right? Delay for a year, rent for 1 extra year, and get the Hajj taken care of. And then you can go and get involved in all these other, situations, rather than create a circumstance where you push off the Hajj because of some desire or aspiration that existed within us. So these things actually are all things that you deal with between yourself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to actually sit down and say, do I have the ability or do I not have the ability? Do I have the wealth? Do I not have the wealth? No one's going to open up your bank statements. Nobody's going to open up your life schedule and tell you whether you're able or not. You can only lay down these principles, and that's what the scholars do. They provide these principles, and then they ask you in sincerity to reflect on your state, to reflect on your circumstances, and decide whether or not you are able to perform the Hajj. If you've performed the Hajj, then you should be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have this opportunity of having fulfilled this incredible act that's present within the deen. And if you haven't performed the Hajj, I think it's something you need to sit down and plan. It's not just going to fall upon you. You need to think, okay, I'm not ready to do it yet, but in the next 5 years, I'm going to get there in this way. Hopefully that intention, then, were you to pass away, hopefully that intention will be sufficient enough to at least protect you on the Day of Judgment from that group of people that denies the Hajj outright or puts their desires before the Hajj. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to be among those who obtain halal wealth in order to perform the Hajj, to be among those who attain free time in order to perform the Hajj, and to be among those who encourage others to perform the Hajj. Wa akhiru ta'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.